Canada is bolstering its security cooperation with Europe against the backdrop of an increasingly destabilized Middle East. Today, Iran launched its retaliation against the U.S. for its direct attack on Iranian nuclear sites. There are a number of U.S. military bases in that region, but Iran attacked just one base in Qatar, with reports it targeted a second base in Iraq. U.S. President Donald Trump says Iran gave advance notice of the strike, adding, "I am pleased to report that no Americans were harmed and hardly any damage was done. And most importantly, they've gotten it all out of their system." Today, Prime Minister Mark Carney met with European Union leaders in Brussels, where they signed a defence and security partnership. It's a broad framework, but it opens the door for Canada to join a more than $1 trillion buildup of Europe's defence industry.
It will strengthen Canada's role in Europe's rapidly evolving defence architecture. And it's just the beginning. We will now swiftly launch talks on Canada's access to a joint military procurement instrument. We call it SAFE. It's 150 billion euros.
Retired Vice-Admiral Mark Norman is a former Vice Chief of the Defence Staff, and he joins me now. Mark Norman, it's good to see you again. Thank you for being here, sir.
Thanks, David, for taking an interest in this. Yep.
Well, there's a lot to talk about. Let's start with the European angle of this. There's still a lot to negotiate, but how much potential does this agreement have to increase Canada's defence capacity and its preparedness?
Yeah, well, as you say, the devil is in the details, and we're at the early stages. I think this is a very encouraging initial step by the Prime Minister and his government. Couple of issues. First of all, accessing both the supply chain and the significant industrial capacity of Europe is useful for Canada. If there are opportunities for bulk purchasing, for example, that could be to our advantage. But one of the things that concerns me as we go forward, and this I hope is one of the details that has to be ironed out, is that there needs to be some reciprocal opportunity for Canadian industry, which has been one of the key things that the Prime Minister has mentioned for the last several months. So this is a good first step. There's lots of excellent equipment and excellent opportunities for partnership, both strategically and industrially. But I think Canada could play a more significant role. And we're at a bit of a disadvantage because of the inherent logistical challenges of getting our stuff across the Atlantic to potential customers.
Yeah, if you make something in British Columbia and you've got to get that to Germany, I mean, you've got a lot of distance with the U.S. just being right there, right? But you can see the strategic necessity of this, right? The fraying relationships with the United States, the strengthening of ties with Europe sort of as a hedge against over-reliance on the U.S., with the Prime Minister talking about 70 to 75 cents of every dollar on defense spending going to America. He's trying to sort of marry defense and industrial policy, but also with trade policy, as this sends a signal to the White House that we have other options.
Yeah, no, and I agree completely. And this has been an encouraging message out of the Prime Minister, even when he was campaigning, and now since he's established his government's priorities. This is not going to be a binary situation where we're all in on one, substituting one dependency for another, but it is an important evolution of our defense industrial relations. And, you know, from an operational perspective, this gives us access to some really impressive capabilities that the Europeans are able to field. I hope that, as I said earlier, that there's opportunities here for a Canadian industry, which has not got the love that it should have for the last few decades.
Yeah, it's at once a hedge and a backstop, and also an industrial policy, all sort of bundled together when you break it down to its intersection and all the issues. This today in Brussels, then it's off to The Hague. Canada just finally come up with a plan to try to get to 2% of GDP for the NATO target by the end of this fiscal year. And the word is there's a communique where the NATO countries are agreeing to go to a blend of 5%, 3.5 plus 1.5 on defense-related spending by 2035. What do you make of that, and what's your sense of Canada's ability to get to those targets when it took 11 years just to get a plan for this one?
Yeah, so I've been saying the last couple of weeks as we've been watching this unfold to other people that, we will be passing through 2% on the way to whatever the new objective is. There'll be lots of discussion about the timelines and our capacity to meet it. Notwithstanding the fiscal challenges that the country faces, we are able to do this if we're smart about it. One of my concerns, and we're already seeing some rumblings in the short term here, is all about the how. And we have a limited bandwidth and capacity within the machinery of government, and we have to be smart about how we spend this money. Obviously, I think this is the right thing to do, but I also think that we need to be measured, and we need to be quite diligent in how we set up the plans to actually move this money. And this has always been the challenge, is actually moving the money. The commitments are easy. It's actually getting it out the door and getting real value for taxpayers, which has been an almost crippling challenge for decades.
Well, Mark Norman, it seems to me, too, that the way we calculate defense spending, or the way that Canada and really the NATO alliance is going to calculate defense spending, that's evolving, right? Like cybersecurity countermeasures, building quantum computing capacity and AI capacity, that asymmetrical warfare, toolkit. These are things the country seems intent on doing as industrial policy that is now going to also count towards maybe defense spending, the way dual purpose infrastructure in the Arctic to open up port access. While it creates critical mineral opportunities, it also counts to NATO. It seems as though if this is the path Canada stays on, it's going to be a whole lot easier to get to where NATO wants you to be as a share of your economy.
Well, easier in the sense that I would agree that it allows us to make smart investments in things which are in our national interest that also are helpful to international peace and security. And
right.
So that's good. I'm not yet convinced that it's going to be easier in terms of the machinery of government. And I'm trying not to be openly critical here, but there are so many priorities and so many initiatives being pursued, especially in the early days of this government, that this is where I'm a little concerned. Yes, I agree completely with the premise of your question, but there be dragons to some degree here.
No, look, I take your point. I meant easier, not from an operationalizing perspective, but from accounting and math. There's more inputs than just how many jets, how many tanks, how many munitions do you have, right? So
right,
look,
and I
think
that's a really, really good thing. I was always critical of the calculus itself. I think this is more sophisticated. I think this is more in Canada's interest and in the interests of the alliance writ large. Yes.
One more thing to touch on with you very quickly is what we're seeing in the Middle East. We saw the U.S. obviously with the big move on Saturday with the bunker busters on Fordo and the other nuclear sites inside Iran. We saw the response from the Iranian regime today. It seems to be very proportional, very calibrated, very measured, designed to show you struck back but not have a meaningful impact, is certainly the initial analysis. What do you make of that response and your sense of whether this could spiral into something larger, or are they kind of finding a level playing field, at least as the U.S. and Iran are concerned?
Well, I'm hopeful it's the latter, as you framed it. I continue to be concerned. There is an unpredictability to the nature of what's going on in this region.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to calculate what the tipping point may or may not be in one particular direction. I think the responses that we're seeing are entirely predictable, and it will be very interesting to watch the next 24 to 48 hours. I think, everybody would like to see a collective breathtaking, if you will. Everybody just kind of suck back here and let's just watch and wait. Iran doesn't have a lot of friends anymore. They are cornered. They are very much on their back feet, and that makes Iran very dangerous, notwithstanding the fact that a lot of their military infrastructure may have been, if not destroyed, certainly damaged. And I'm not entirely sure. Obviously, I'm only seeing, like you, what's on the public record here. But you know, I think I don't think we've seen the end of Iran, and that makes me a little nervous. I'm not trying to be a scaremonger here, but this is not over.
No, I think everyone's nervous. I think that's probably at the lower end of people's emotional range after the news of what happened over the weekend. Look, retired Vice Admiral Mark Norman, always appreciate the time. Thanks for joining us, sir.
Thank you, David. Have a good evening.
You too, sir.